Friends, can you believe we're already doing our August Q&A? I feel like it was a week ago that I filmed July, but really excited to be doing it. I actually really love these videos. It's super fun for me to see what y'all are thinking about, what kinds of questions and dilemmas the other courses bring up for you, and how we can work together to bring some more clarity to the path. So all of these questions every month come from folks who support my work on Patreon. Thank you so very much. Every tier, come over and see what we're up to. There's all kinds of goodies that happen over on Patreon. Most of my work does end up here on the YouTube for free, open access to everybody, but sometimes it's 4 or 5 months after we discuss it on Patreon. So thank you very much to all the patrons and to folks who are over there hanging out in that fantastic community. With that being said, let's get to it. So, first question. Also, I should mention that pretty much every question this month has inspired an entire class. So, I'm going to touch on these questions and try to answer them well, but I would like for you to know that there are full Friday community classes coming in the works on pretty much all of these topics, because the questions continue to be so good, so inspirational. So Sharon asked about etymology and how we can work with language and linguistics to deepen our connection to the work. Now, for folks who have taken any of my classes in person or sat ritual with me, you know I'm an etymology nerd through and through. I love language, and I love looking at how language relates to how people think, how certain cultures work, what certain cultures do, what certain traditions do. I think it's incredibly fascinating, and I have spent a good part of about 15 years being really into studying the Proto-Indo-European language tree, a lot of the child languages, but really that idea that when we go back far enough with all of these Proto-Indo-European languages, there is a common root structure that I think is incredibly cool. So etymology comes up a lot for me because I really like how words that are sort of commonplace for us have these deeper roots and these deeper meanings that may indicate that they meant more to our deep ancestors than they do to us. And I also really appreciate how etymology shows us what proper, non-cooperative, non-appropriative syncretism looks like in action. Okay, so I want to break those two things up, I think, in this answer. But again, Sharon and everyone else, I want to do a whole class on this. So, point one, we have so many words that we kick around that we don't understand how magical they are, right? And I think this is something that happens a lot in English language. It feels really divorced from our animistic magical roots for a lot of different reasons. But when we get into etymology, especially following English back through the Proto-Indo-European language tree, we can find some gems. One of my favorites, just off the top of my head, because there are so many. And I'm trying to figure out, by the way, when I do a class on this, how I can create a little lexicon of like some of my favorite words and stories about them. So that's kind of the point, and it maybe will be a multi-part class. Maybe we do one every few months to just look at some of the words that we use that have power. They're incredibly magical words. So one of my favorites to talk about is the word hummus. Now, not hummus, the dip, right? The chickpea dip, not that hummus. Although there may be some linguistic resonance there that I don't know about. I'm talking about hummus as we use it in the English language to define or to talk about soil, to talk about rich, fertile earth. So you will oftentimes, when you go into like a garden shop, see bags of hummus, and it's not dirt. it's not sand, and sometimes it's not even soil, but it's more of like a rich, super vital, composty material that you can turn into your garden to really like build up the soil and really bring in a lot of nutrients, a lot of nourishment to the soil, right? So that's the humus that we're talking about. So that humus has a very deep etymological root that relates to or connects it to another English word, humble. Okay? Now, a lot of people raise their hackles about the word humble because we assume that humility means being a doormat or letting people take advantage of you. No. In this situation, humble is an invitation to be soil-like, right? To not only be low, okay, so be in a position of humbleness, but also to be like the earth, to be a fertile ground upon which ideas, inspiration, the inklings of the spirits that we ally ourselves to can all grow abundantly. So we have this etymological link between humus, the word for rich soil, humility, the word for a mental state or an expressive state that connects us to being like the earth. And then, even further back, it links to a super, super early Proto-Indo-European word, degom, which basically probably translates to earth with a capital E, but is also a descriptive proper noun for the Proto-Indo-European early concept of the Earth Mother or the Earth Goddess. So here we now have a tripartite etymological expression of fertile soil, being soil-like, and a goddess or goddess of land or earth goddess. And so there's a whole meditation there that you can do about how we can carry ourselves in a humble way to become more soil-like, which also aligns us more directly with the land as person. Okay, so this is just one example, one tangent about how awesome etymology can be and how we can find these common words that feel very pedestrian, very just a word, right? And in fact, with hummus, for example, a word we don't really use that often unless you're a gardener, and we start to realize there's an incredible amount of sacredness in that word, a lot of depth, lots of layers. The word hummus is an onion that you can keep peeling and keep peeling. So just trying to wet your whistle a little bit because we're going to do a whole class on this. So fantastic question, Sharon. Thank you so much. Always bringing the good ones. Another one of my favorite question askers is our friend Pip from across the pond. Pip asks about lunar cycles and how lunar cycles relate to our work with the plant spirits. Now, this is something I can only scratch the surface on here because this really deserves a full class. And I'm going to do a Friday community class on this topic, but I'm also going to do an advanced class on this topic where we get into some of the really deep mysteries of lunar work as it relates to plant spirits. Advanced classes happen once a month. They're available to patrons on tiers 2 and 3, and they go deep. They're closer to an hour long. They're immersive. I've got PowerPoints, cutaways. It's, the whole thing. So just know we're only scratching the surface. So lunar tides, here's the mystery that I will give you for now to think about, to chew about. And for some people, this will unpack the whole mystery. When the moon is full or bright, right? It's at its fullest. The plants are the most invested in our side of the hedge. As the moon waxes, meaning that every night from the new moon, it becomes brighter and brighter, bigger and bigger, the plants pull more and more into our world. Sap rises, they hold more water, their hormonal constituents change, even the posture of the plants change slightly. And this is symbolic of the plants with the full moon moving more into our world, into this world where we occupy. Then, as the moon starts to wane, gets darker and darker, smaller and smaller every night as it moves toward the dark moon, the plants recede and their life energy, their vital force, and their virtues, their magical and medicinal virtues, move back down into their roots, right? Which is symbolic of them moving back into their own world, the hidden world, the world of mystery that we cannot perceive. So there is this respiration that happens. There's this cycle that happens with the lunar tide, that the plants come up into our world, retreat back into their world, come back up into our world, retreat back into their world. And it is like a breath, right? And breath is very, very important in all of this work. It's what connects us intimately to the plant spirits all the time. So at the full moon, the plants are here. They're easier to communicate with. It's easier for us to see hidden things with the light of the moon, both literally and figuratively. At the dark of the moon, the plants are more invested in their own mysteries. They have gone back to the world of spirit, the source of all vital force. They are maybe in a state of rest, but there are some plants who have taught me that the full moon draws their spirit into this side. They're kind of chasing the light. And then at the dark moon on our side of the hedge, there's actually a brightness on their side of the hedge. So we're in these like opposite energetic spaces. So then they move to the root to chase the light within the earth, the sun in the center of the earth, as we might say. So during that, of course, for harvesting stuff, for example, we would want to harvest aerial parts of the plant closer to the full moon when all of that sap, all the power is there. We want to harvest roots at the new moon or the dark moon when all of the power is down there. We tend to do works of increase, growth, wisdom, expanse, light, and abundance at the full moon. We tend to do works of shadow, mystery, the unknown, and initiation at the dark moon. You see how these all relate to one another? So, just a little nudge. This needs its own class, for sure, as you can probably tell. So we will definitely do that. Thank you so much, Pip, for another fantastic question. And then a few others that came in. A couple folks just sent me stuff via Instagram, and a couple folks through email. So I wanted to at least nod at those. A really great question. Here's another one we're going to do a whole class on, which is what it's like working with different deities or gods in relationship to our plant spirit work. And here's what I will say. Every tradition, every culture has deities who are considered agrarian or forest or wild or green, right? There are different deities in every pantheon and every culture that are intimately related with plants in general, with the cycles of agriculture, with the cycles of the plants, with different trees, with different places where plants grow, like a forest or a meadow. And these are the deities that I, of course, naturally gravitate to. And while we should not be limited in any way to these deities, what I wanted to give as a response to this in this brief class, this brief Q&A, is that there are deities who their area of interest, their area of influence in the cosmos is the same as yours. So if you're a plant nerd, if you're somebody who studies herbalism or practices herbalism professionally, or if plants are a big part of your spiritual practice or a part of your magical practice, or you're a gardener or a forager or a landscaper or a tree doctor, there are deities, ancient spirits who have massive perspective, right? They're able to see the web of life with a great amount of panoramic view, which is what makes them gods. Their influence is massive, who are concerned about the same things you are. They're interested in the same stuff you're interested in. They like haunting the same forests you haunt and growing in the same gardens where you grow. So we, as plant spirit working folk, already have these cool deities we can reach out to and connect with. And the one that comes to my mind for whatever reason right now, even though they're not a deity that I work with at all, is the Irish Ermid. She has such cool lore and story about her personal relationship to herbs and healing with herbs. and how that relates to her father, who was considered the god of healing in old Irish paganism. So she's cool. She's a cool one to look at. Airmid. Airmid. Hopefully I'm not saying that too incorrectly. I'm sure it's not even close to being proper, but hopefully it's not bad. The goddess Hecate, who is very much experiencing a renaissance and a resurgence in calling her devotees from every corner right now. Hecate very much has a lot of influence over plants, working with plants more in the magical side, and especially those plants with a little bit of a baneful energy, which can be fun. My particular patron that I work with, Viridis, the Green Man, who has no mythology and no real solid lore, which makes him a fun one to hang out with. Lots of different deities related to the forest, related to trees, thinking about Cernunnos, Herne the Hunter, Jack in the Green, the May King, John Barleycorn, like so many cool, somewhere in that fuzzy region of folk hero to deity to god area. I don't really get too hung up in it. I think if they're stronger and smarter than me, I want to hang out with them so they'll teach me cool stuff. That's kind of how I think about it. So really cool question, and I just wanted to put it out there that there are deities who are into the same stuff we're into. So they're typically the best ones to call on. I wrote down a couple others. Somebody was asking, what is a good book reference for medicine making tinctures, salves, balms, extractions, infusions, liniments, salves, all that. And that book would be James Green's celebrated classic, The Herbal Medicine Maker's Handbook. This is a very accessible book. I've never seen it be sold out anywhere. It's never one of those books that you can't find, so people on Amazon are charging you $300. They continue to print this because it's a classic. Mine is super beat up. This book has seen some things, and I will tell you, highly recommended. Even for folks who aren't super into medicinal herbalism, you will find things in here that you can apply in your spiritual or magical or ritual practice, guaranteed. One of my favorite things about the way he puts this book together is every section, he does a really cool chart. So he'll talk about the herbs that are the best work with in the form of an oil, best work with in the form of a tincture, or in water, right? Which I think is very, very helpful and something we don't really hear about a lot. Something I suggest, this is my shop copy here at the apothecary, so I keep it nice. My home version, I was able to take this to my local Kinko's. So I think you could just go to any copy shop, and they were able to cut the spine off and spiral bind this so that I can lay it flat on my working space. And if I'm following a recipe or doing one of the more complicated ratios that I don't remember, so I go back to this book time and time again, it's very easy. So highly recommend James Green, The Medicine Maker's Handbook. He also wrote one of my other favorite books, The Male Herbal. Very limited amount of books out there about herbalism for the male body. So highly recommend that one as well. I think that's a good book for everyone to have. Lots of really cool perspective and information in medicine. Last question, somebody asked about the difference and the similarities, in my opinion, it's all I can give you, between sort of what we have started to call green witchcraft and what I have been calling green sorcery, right? So I'm thinking about the amazing Anne Mora, who wrote the Green Witchcraft series. I think there's 4 or 5 of those. I'm thinking about Ray Beth, whose work I aligned to not as much. I'm thinking about Aaron Murphy Hiscock, whose Green Witchcraft I did not align to at all. Again, not a quality judgment. I'm just letting you know sort of who I'm thinking of when I talk about Green Witchcraft, because there may be teachers out there that I haven't heard of or haven't read which is leaving me a little uneducated about what is green witchcraft. So to me, my understanding is green witchcraft is following a basically Wiccan model of witchcraft with a real focus on working with the plants, making sure that plants are part of rituals, they're part of spells, they're part of how we're honoring the different Sabbats at the wheel of the year. Plants are playing a bigger part in the Esbats, how we're celebrating the moon cycles, divination, what divination cards you use are maybe plants, what deities you work with are maybe agricultural or plant-based deities. So that's my understanding. Again, could be wrong. If I am, or if there's a different perspective you want to hear, let me know and I'll read some books and educate myself and come back to, we'll do this again next time. So to me, witchcraft generally is systematic, meaning there's steps. Point 1, point 2, point 3. There's oftentimes a read or a charge that implies a belief structure. There are often within modern forms of witchcraft, but definitely not traditional witchcraft, to separate the two because they are very different. But modern forms of witchcraft, so the Anmora, the Rebeth, all of that, people talk about the law of return, the Wiccan read, do no harm, that what you put out comes back to you threefold. So there's some morality there, not so much ethic as morality, like, this is what you can do and what you cannot do. So it's a little more systematic, a little more bullet pointed, a little more belief oriented. I think it's easier to call modern witchcraft a religion, and a lot of people do. They say, what religion are you? Oh, I'm Wiccan, or oh, I'm witchcraft, or whatever. But again, with a hard bent towards the more natural approach to craft, working with the plant spirits. And I also have found that the folks who identify as green witch are the ones who are more likely to really understand how animism plays a role in witchcraft. Whereas people who don't, generally when I have conversations with them about animism, there's really not a lot of understanding. It's not a concept they've thought about. It's not really a big part of their practice. There's definitely an awareness of spirits and deities, but not a depth, not the perspective that animism brings. So I appreciate that, of course. For me, sorcery is simply about the reality of spirits and our relationship with them. And in our case, it's green sorcery. So the spirits we're most concerned with relating to are the plants, right? Not a lot of structure, right? Sorcery, as I teach it and as I practice it, is a power given from mentor to apprentice that unfolds in the apprentice however it will. That there's not you have to do this in order for it to work, versus here's a power and a wisdom and a relationship being gifted to you, a familiar being gifted to you. Let's see how that unfolds. With guidance and inspiration, of course, but it's just more personal and less dogmatic and less structured and less systematic. Sorcery by nature is amoral, meaning there is no moral code, which is why you see lots of sorcerous people work with baneful plants. There's no idea that something is wrong all the time, right? So where witchcraft tends to be a moral tradition, modern witchcraft anyway, not traditional craft. Traditional witchcraft is very amoral. Sorcery is amoral. So that doesn't mean, though, that it's unethical. This is the tricky part. To me, this is one of the biggest separations between witchcraft and sorcery. Sorcery is amoral, but highly ethical. It's about ethics. It's about relationship. It's about what is relevant in the moment based on the circumstances at hand. What may be inappropriate one moment may be totally appropriate the next moment. So to shut all of it down and say all of it's bad, all of it's dark or evil or black, doesn't make any sense. There are times this is what I tell students all the time. There are times to write somebody's name on a charm in a healing tree, and there are times to write somebody's name on a charm that gets buried in the graveyard, right? They're both relevant and applicable. It's all about ethics and relationship, doing things that lean into a harmonious state and away from a chaotic state. So no morality, lots of ethics. When we see these traditions that are very moral, it causes people to lose touch with their own sense of ethics. And instead of doing what's right in the moment, they do what's right based on the rules. And sometimes what we find is that morality prevents people with privilege from doing the right thing for marginalized people, right? There's a lot of implications there about sometimes the right thing to do in the moment is not going to line up with the rules very well. But shitty rules are meant to be broken, right? At least in a magical way, right? Sometimes we can just influence things without actually going out and breaking a rule, as a disclaimer. So I would say that the big difference is morality. The big difference is power over structure. And I would say the other big difference is animism, that sorcery is about the trafficking of spirits, that it is all about living in a world filled with persons and trying to relate harmoniously in that world. And that green prefix for me just means that our focus is on the plants, that we love hanging out with the plants. There are animal spirits, the fae, the spirits of land, and we love all of them and we honor all of them appropriately, but it's the plants that really get us, and they're the ones that we like to hang out with, and they're protectors, the gods, deities, heroes that surround them, and other humans that love them, and plants and animals and pollinators that love them. We tend to like align ourselves to those spirits too. So it's green, right? It's a green tradition. So I think that's good for now. We're creeping up to a half an hour here, so a little longer than I expected. Thanks for sticking around to the end. I really love doing these. I look forward to them every month. I post an open question invite on Patreon on the 20th of every month. It gives you 8 or 9 days to submit your questions. You can do them publicly. You can do them anonymously through DM or email or whatever. And they end up in this video. And sometimes you end up getting a whole class out of it. So there's that. It's totally worth it. If you got something on your mind, write it down, save it for the question call on the 20th, and I will make sure it gets in this video. Thanks again to everyone who's supporting my work on Patreon. It allows me to keep doing what I love and sharing with you guys and connecting, and it's great. And with that, I'll see you next month.